Welcome back, DIVEBOMB IndyCar Podcast, to our part 2 of our 2025 driver review. If you didn't catch it, we had part 1 last week where we reviewed drivers from 34th to 16th in the standings. And if you did catch episode or want a refresher, we're reviewing each driver's season who participated in 2025 and putting them in a tier list A to F, just to give a bit of thought on each driver's season. To give maybe a spotlight to those we haven't spoken about in our season review, we haven't spoken about across the course of the season. So every driver gets a representative review of how their 2025 season went. We obviously had some news in the last week as well. The primary one being the IndyCar calendar, being Archie did a bonus episode on that last week if you haven't caught that already. And we've got a bit more news to do the driver market, which we'll recap later on in this episode. Archie joins me as usual, also joined by Evan for this episode once again. So welcome back. But let's kick off with Alexander Rossi, who we did not mention in our season review. So gives him a good chance to get in the limelight. And maybe that speaks about how anonymous Alexander Rossi's season has kind of been compared to others by the fact we didn't even mention him in our season review. And to be honest, I can see why. He had quite a quiet season at Ed Carpenter Racing. Archie, do you want to lead with your thoughts for his season?
Yeah, I feel like it was a good start. I mean, he was in the top 10, I think, 3 of the first 4 races. And then it just felt like it went a bit barren in the middle part of the season before actually a very good end to the year. I think the starts of the season gave a bit of a sense of, my word, this is like an immediate upturn for an Ed Carpenter Racing team. Obviously had that fresh investment last off season, but yeah, it just didn't quite kick on as you would have expected. Like, I think he had the fair share of issues. I know the Indy 500 was looking really strong, but that ended up literally up in flames. And then just other moments throughout the season, like Toronto, where he had that freak sticky out bit of wall, destroyed his race and caused massive damage on from what would usually just be like a glance of the wall. So yeah, a funny season. Like, I think there was a phase where he didn't have the pace, and then something just seemed to click at the end of the year. I mean, he was in the top 10 the last 3 races. He had back-to-back top 5s in that run as well, including Portland, the road course, which seems to have been ECR's kind of Achilles heel in these tougher few years that they've had. It didn't quite reach the peaks of Rasmussen, who obviously had the podium and the win, and he was behind Rasmussen in points, and 15th is behind the VK threshold that we always talk about. But I think wider than just his performance on track, Rossi's also been credited quite a lot for his mentorship with Rasmussen and his leadership in the team. And ultimately, it was never going to be a one-year thing. I think it was a decent start of building towards something longer term in this project.
Yeah, I think the best way to describe Alexander Rossi's season is probably remarkably unremarkable in a sense. Just there wasn't really, as you said, the major high points that we saw with Rasmussen, but especially at the start and the end of the season, there was consistent results, and he was always sort of up in the area to bring home points for ECR when Rasmussen eventually got a bit fed up and either just decided to put it in the wall.
Alexander Rossi's season, I think we always said, was pretty anonymous. His qualifying wasn't actually too bad. He qualified an average of 15th at the end, which wasn't too bad. He got 1 fast 6. I believe it was in the thermal club this season, a couple more fast 12s to add as well. And it felt he had a real edge on Rasmussen at the start of the year, but I think towards the end of the year, maybe he didn't as much. I think a lot of that is obviously because, one, the perspective was skewed because of Rasmussen's podium, Rasmussen's win, and also because of the fact there was more ovals, which as we know is Rasmussen's strong suit, and not necessarily Rossi's strong suit in comparison. Rossi's been always more of a road street course guy because that's where his background has come from, obviously. So I feel we saw enough from Rossi to suggest him as a team leader. To be honest, I would have maybe hoped for better than the VK territory, considering Rossi's experience and considering the investment that's gone into the team. I think maybe when you look at it in that perspective, you can be a bit disappointed, but the fact there was a lot of other surprises, like someone like the Maya Shanks being so strong, where AJ Foyt Racing was strong again, where maybe that pecking order does change ever so slightly. So it was a bit of a weird year for Rossi. I don't think, again, quiet was a bad thing. I don't really remember any hugely catastrophic mistakes on his side across the course of the season. At least that were his fault. He obviously had the Indy 500 mechanical. Iowa, he had a mechanical as well when he's running decently there as well. So, as I said, a bit of a weird year for Rossi, but these sort of years happen, and it's always going to be a bit of an adaptory year, and next year is really where we need to start seeing top 10 in the championship, I think, to get the overall progression. But let's have a look at where we're going to put Rossi in our tier list. I think we're probably looking at the C range here, I think, is a fairly safe bet.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very hard one. I think C, middle of the park, that kind of feels like where his year has been. Not sure where in C, to be honest.
I would probably go between Ferrucci and Daly.
Yeah. I was about to say, I'd say above Daly.
Ferrucci had bigger peaks, though, I think, is the difference you've got with Rossi compared to Rossi. And Ferrucci did those, I keep on saying it, but Ferrucci did those with 25 points at Detroit, which cost him 5 positions in the championship.
Yeah, okay, yeah, I'm content with it to go between Ferrucci and Daly. Peacekeeper.
Yeah, that's why we always have 3 firsts, so we do need the peacekeeper. So we'll move on to 14th in the championship, who, in true Rinus VK territory, had to finish between 12th and 14th. When will the streak end? We don't know if he's going to be in the field next year, but it's got to end at some point. What's that? 6 seasons on the bounce, isn't it? He's finished between 12th and 14th, so that's ultra consistency. Whenever he's going to get a top drive to hopefully improve that, who knows? But maybe he'll still finish in 12th and 14th for a top drive. Who knows? But I know Archie did off last time, but I think it's only right we let you lead off for Rinus VK as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it was an incredible story, really, because this was a driver in the wilderness. I mean, even at the turn of the year, he was a free agent. He didn't have a team. And really, after the year that they had in 2024, this was also a team that was in serious strife, really, in Dale Coyne Racing. And that kind of collaboration as they came together, really, within a month to go until the season begun, was a perfect one. It felt like they almost saved one another in a time of need, both for the driver and for the team. And I know VK had done some work with them throughout the off season. He'd done the 500 test in, was it October? And he might already have been on the books when he had that. I think he supported Abel at a test at some point early in the year. But yeah, I think it was such a year that it really put his name back on the map in terms of being in the conversation with top teams, which was the case in his early years with Ed Carpenter Racing and kind of faded as the team had a few tougher years. And yeah, from being in the brink of not even being in the sport, getting this very last minute deal together and putting together the year that he had was quite impressive. And it's really sad, to be fair, that he's not continuing it with Dale Coyne Racing, this journey, I feel. And I mean, reports have now emerged that he's not going to go to AJ Foyt Racing as was initially suggested. And I think now that, as we'll touch on in a bit, Dale Coyne have got this alliance with Andretti, with Hauger coming on board. Feels like maybe a miss for VK not to still be on board, especially if he doesn't end up landing at Foyt, with all of these conflicting reports out there. But yeah, regardless, a pretty special year, I think, for both parties, even if it does end in that bit of disappointment, just for the fact that, I mean, you look at 24 for Dale Coyne Racing, their best race result was 13th, and neither car was anywhere near the leaders' circle. They were so cut adrift from any other full-time entry. And 1 year on, VK's 14th in points. He's obviously, as you say, Dan, continued that consistency of always finishing between 12th and 14th, even in his tougher years with Ed Carpenter Racing, and ended the year with 7 top 10s, which was a joint personal best for him in a single season, and 9 results of 13th or better, which is, obviously 13th being the best result the team managed at all last season with all the uncertainty. So, yeah, obviously the highlight being that podium in Toronto, his first podium since 22, the team's first on road and street course since 21 with Grosjean. And it's quite incredible, really, how much one driver helped to inspire such a big turnaround. And I think, yeah, very delighted as a big supporter of what VK could be capable of, and feel vindicated.
Yeah, I mean, it was a fantastic season. And as you said, with the 12th to 14th range, despite him coming 14th this time, I feel like it was probably the best that we've seen from him in the series, I think. Maybe before his injury, maybe that was along the same lines, but I think nobody was, some might, but I wasn't expecting quite this good a performance. And although you mentioned Toronto being obviously a huge moment for them having a podium for the first time since 2022, I think Barber was probably when he just stood out to me the most. The fact that he could do that pretty much all on pace, because it was because there wasn't a single caution that race. So it was to do that. That really stood out to me, I think, throughout his season.
I mean, what's quite interesting is there's a clear lack of pace in the team still. Actually, only Di Francesco, Schwartzman, Rob, and Abel actually had a worse qualifying average than VK across the course of the season. Although he did reach the fast 12 5 times. So when he did reach the fast 12, he just didn't qualify very well at all, quite clearly. But his average finish was actually 13th, 13.7 or something, which was only 0.1 off Scott McLaughlin's averaging finishing position, which is pretty remarkable. If you said a coin and Scott McLaughlin would be 0.1 positions apart in finishing average, that would have been pretty remarkable. I think VK's season tailed off towards the end, but I think a lot of that really was partially down to the ovals. The fact that, we had Milwaukee towards the end, Gateway towards the end of the season, Iowa's, and the Coyne's oval pace really still isn't there. And I wouldn't say VK outside the 500 is a particularly accomplished oval driver. I don't think that's an unfair statement to say. It's never quite been his forte in comparison to road and street courses. So that form did tail off towards the end of the year, which was a slight shame. But I think in some ways, when you compare that form, the expectation he had lifted so heavily, where that form, which we kind of see as disappointing, actually wouldn't have been unacceptable at this point last year, which is a real credit to VK, and he put his name back on the market. And I think that move from Ed Carpenter Racing has done him so much good. And I know there seems to be nowhere for him to really go in 2026 as things currently stand. But as I said, it's sort of put his name out there, and now Rinus VK is somebody who is on the radar of a lot of the top teams, and maybe rightly so. Maybe he does deserve his chance at some point. But we'll have to wait and see on that. But a really nice story for VK, who was on the verge of not having a seat, and it wasn't a risk for Dale Coyne to pick him up, but he really seemed to have one more chance. This was now or never, and he's kept himself in there. And what his future holds, we don't know. But I'm glad that he's had a season, and he's proved he can do it outside of Ed Carpenter Racing and come back to the podium, because I think that result was richly deserved.
Pretty sweet that he ended up splitting the ECR cars in the championship as well.
And still finished in the 12th to 14th ranges.
Exactly.
Poetry, really, isn't it? But let's go back onto our tier list for Rinus VK. Now, this one is a pretty bit more difficult than Alexander Rossi. I think we are looking at top two tiers for this one. I'd probably say not quite enough for A, but probably definitely had a Takuma Sato in B.
You know where I'd put him if I had my way, but I'll put him top of B.
Yeah, I think the hangover from the podium in Toronto sort of brought the level down a bit. Before that, I think we'd definitely be looking at A.
Well, he was a driver of the season asterisk mid-season, Archie. So
he was, yeah. I mean, yeah, I would just say I know it felt a bit unjust when he left ECR, but I think, as you mentioned, that environment change is something that he really needed, and whether to prove to himself or mainly just prove to the paddock really what he could do, just because it did end up going a bit stale at ECR. So yeah, massive chapeau. Let's
go on to Rinus VK's former teammate in Christian Rasmussen. Evan, tell us about Christian Rasmussen's season.
Well, I don't think we can talk about his season without talking about his first win, and watching that was one of, I think, my favourite, as well as a lot of other people's favourite moments of the season. Just the way that he managed to carve through the field, and seeing how on edge he was in the car. It was just amazing to watch. But I think that sort of can be the issue with Rasmussen sometimes. He always seems to be on the edge. And as we've seen, he's had some fairly decent incidents throughout this year, I think would be the nice way to put it.
Rasmussen started the season really slowly. I remember speaking to Ed Carpenter in the build-up to Indy 500, just saying, look, we've had this new investment. How do you think the team has done? He said, it's going well on Rossi's side, but Rasmussen's side, the results aren't quite there yet. And he did start the season really slowly. I mean, his best finish was 12th after 5 rounds of the season. And then, as he always does, he's only done it twice, but he had a good Indy 500 because he's already starring at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, despite his inexperience there, and obviously built on that quickly after with that podium in Gateway, which blossomed into strong Iowa weekends, and then eventually the victory in Milwaukee. And his road course form is actually improving too. I think it's quite noticeable. He had 4 fast 12 appearances, or 4 top 12 qualifyings in 2025, and 3 of them are actually on road street courses. We hail him for his oval performances, but his overall qualifying average, listen to this, was 17.5 for maybe one of the best over races in the series, is qualifying down in 17th, 18th position on average, which, I mean, it makes fantastic racing because he's giving us something to watch on the Sundays or the Saturdays in some cases, and he always brings the action, apart from Nashville when he crashed in the opening corner by himself, which was a bit of a disaster after his victory the week before. But as Evan, you said, the season will be highlighted by that fantastic victory in Milwaukee and the sort of superhero drive there. But it's easy to forget that very good run at Gateway he had, and I feel like the progression year 1 to year 2 has been significant. And it felt like at the end of last year, when Rasmussen was seemingly chosen over VK, that was a bit of an eyebrow raiser, but that decision now certainly seems to have been paid off on Ed Carpenter's side, and Rasmussen suddenly looks like he is someone who can really lead that team forward and be a significant part of the series for the years to come. His over form is absolutely sensational, and the road and street course form is coming. I feel like he maybe lacks consistency, and he was unlucky. He had a mechanical failure in Detroit. I remember he's having a really good weekend there. He was running inside the top 10 at Mid-Ohio. He had another issue there. So there were some results that fell out of his hands. In Toronto, he got spun quite early on, didn't he? I think it was by power in the opening phases. So there was a lot of lost points there. I think consistency generally has been lax, but I mean, it's not taken away from his overall performance because he's already showing himself to be a very fine overall driver and a really, really strong sophomore season, even without the victory for Rasmussen. And as I said, I think the gamble that Ed Carpenter made last year to maybe keep him over VK looks to be the right decision.
Yeah, I think there is still some way to go in terms of finding consistency on road and street courses. Like he only had 3 results better than 15th in the races, and as much as you mentioned, okay, there's glimmers of pace there. I think his race day form is leaving a little bit to be desired, but obviously his overall form, I mean, is exceptional. I think he's emerged as certainly one of the most thrilling and really one of the best overall races in the series. And I think you have to say it was a very shrewd decision at the end of the 2024 season for Ed Carpenter to step aside to allow Rasmussen to get that bit of oval experience at the end of what was supposed to be only a road and street plus Indy 500 season. And really that's resulted in this season in him excelling on, I mean, every different type of oval that we race on. I know we're missing that kind of 1.5 mile half sort of oval, but there's still a pretty diverse range when you look at the difference between a Milwaukee and a Gateway and an Iowa. They've all got their different quirks, and obviously IMS as well, but that goes without saying. But Rasmussen's really kind of come into his own on all of them. And as you said, Dan, that was often not him being on top by virtue of qualifying particularly well. It was by virtue of his racecraft. And I mean, that final 20, 30 laps in Milwaukee is about as great a late race flurry from an individual driver you will see, because I know he was on fresh tyres, but none of the other drivers on fresh tyres could do anything like that. And I think the way he raced from off and back in the field was pretty amazing. Like, even when he got the podium at Gateway, he was on fire at one point in that race. Literally on fire, literally and metaphorically. I think he was sent to the back of the field for some reason there as well, and always managed to get back to the front. And he's so fun to watch. Can't imagine he's particularly fun to watch for anyone at ECR, but that always being on the ragged edge, but kind of always seeming in control, bar, unfortunately, Nashville, where, his luck did run out a bit on that opening lap. But yeah, respectable season. I think the biggest reflection is obviously that he outscored Rossi, his much more experienced teammate, across the course of the season.
Okay, so let's have a look at the tier list for Christian Rasmussen. Now, this is a difficult one to rank, I think. I think probably B is the answer because it was a much better sophomore season than we expected. Would it be above VK? I think probably because of the victory, I'll personally place him above VK, but I'm happy to interpretations.
I think by virtue of the win, he probably is ahead of VK.
I'm happy to agree with the overall majority, but I would probably put VK for the season as a whole in front. But I think it'd be fair to put him there.
It's hard to weigh like the peaks up against the kind of the more consistency.
Okay, let's go on to Joseph Newgarden, who potentially is maybe the most difficult driver, I think, to discuss across the entirety of these 34 drivers. Now, I'm going to list some Joseph Newgarden bad luck throughout the course of the year. So, St. Petersburg ran out of fuel on the final lap. Long Beach had a seatbelt failure. Indianapolis road course had an issue before the start, which effectively put him in the back. Indianapolis 500 has a mechanical failure whilst competing for victory. Gateway gets into an incident whilst leading when Louis Foster spins. Road America obviously crashed by himself. Mid-Ohio, we still don't really know what happened there, but he had some sort of random spin as soon as the green flag went. Iowa 1, we had he was caught out in the pit lane. Iowa 2, we had him getting caught out by caution twice. Toronto, he got caught up in an accident with Jacob Abel through no fault of his own. The list goes on and on and on and on. I think I've got most of it there. What did in Portland? He finished 24th. I cannot remember. What did
He got hit by Dixon.
Yes, he got hit by Dixon, didn't he, after he came out of the pits? So there we go. How many have I given there? 10, maybe examples?
I mean, it's astonishing. Like, I feel like Iowa was the perfect kind of exemplification of it, having 2 wins on the cards, really, only to have a slow pit stop. And then the second race, a bad yellow, races back to the front and then gets caught out by another bad yellow. He's been upside down. He's been on top of another car, fuel issues, and being wiped out by Dixon is quite something, because that's not something that's happened to many drivers.
And there was a lot made by the media, as we know, of Newgarden's catastrophic year and how bad his season is and how he hadn't won for most of the season. But, you take those results into context, and actually there was just so much bad luck through no fault of his own that, his positions in the championship, whatever, just got massively inflated just because of how bad his luck was. I don't think he drove particularly badly. Yes, he made some pretty poor errors, but 90% of the time it was just bad luck more than anything else. I mean, I will say his qualifying wasn't superb in comparison to what we know he can do. His average qualifying position was 12, which we know isn't great. Only 1 pole across the course of the year, and we know he's a better qualifier than that, and you do take that into account. But the rhetoric for the whole year has been how disastrous Newgarden's year has been, and I do think it hasn't been a good year. He isn't driven as well as he has in previous years, but I think you just have to take what has happened into some context and go, he drove a lot better than 11th in the championship across the course of the year. He probably should have had definitely 2, probably 3 or 4 victories across the course of the year. And when you shift that perspective, and now he's suddenly 6th in points and multiple victories, well, suddenly it's not a great season, but it's a decent season for Newgarden. And it's been a difficult few years for him, and this has obviously been the most difficult of them all. He was never really keen to speak to media for long periods of time, and he just seems to be in a bit of a rut. So hopefully this off-season, yes, again, gives him a bit of a refresh mind, because we do want to see Newgarden at his best. But just a strange season, which I think you can't really talk about without mentioning just how bad his luck was.
Yeah, it was a bizarre season. I mean, coming into the start of this year, if you say Newgarden in 12th place in the standings, I think some would call you a bit delusional. But just the luck that you said, it was just awful. I think the Gateway crash was probably another sort of moment at the season that you could sort of summarize it all up. The pace, I think especially in the race, you said he had not too great qualifying form, but I think his pace in the race really was quite impressive. And just not really getting any results from it, especially in the mid-season. And you could see that his sort of demeanor had changed sort of Indy 500 onwards, where there was all the drama there, obviously. And it's difficult. And I am glad that obviously the win in Nashville keeping his keeping his streak alive, which is always quite good to see. I think, yeah. Other than that, if he hadn't got a result towards the end of the season, I think it would probably go down as quite a catastrophic one, which it was in some sense. But just in terms of the pace is still there. And in a year that was sort of up in the air in some sense with Team Penske, I think it's good to show that they still can rely on him.
I will just say, Newgarden's qualifying average I've quoted includes him being relegated to the back of the Indy 500. If he qualified 10th, that qualifying average would have improved to 10th, to make clear, which would have put him about 7th of the overall drivers. So, little caveat there. But as you said, I think he did resurrect his season with that victory in Nashville. I think that was an important victory, even if he didn't necessarily see it that way.
Yeah, I mean, we've obviously covered in depth what a terrible year it's been for Penske. Their worst season collectively since '99, pretty much. And I think Newgarden ultimately was at the head of those issues. And as you mentioned, like, okay, there were some shortcomings in pace and execution and performance, but not as dramatic as the results suggest, because so much of it did come down to, often in very advantageous positions, just being caught out by anything and everything, really. And he spent most of the season kind of low teens in the championship. So 12th in the standings, which is, I think, his worst since 2014, certainly his worst at Penske, ends up being like something of a success, which I think says all you need to know about the year that he ended up having. And yeah, I completely agree with you guys and the sentiment that Nashville feels like it was a richly deserved result, because I think particularly on the ovals, as we've become accustomed to, he was often at the head of the field and often had the pace. He could have won Gateway, he could have won both Iowa races off the top of my head. I mean, he could have won the 500. He came from the back to be in the top 5, like before the halfway mark. I mean, that was astonishing. And yeah, just was struck with the most bewildering and inexplicable range of baffling issues across the 17 races. And I mean, that ended, I think he finished in the 20s 7 times. And ultimately, this does continue a downwards trajectory in the standings. Obviously, he had those 3 runner-up finishes in points, and then it went to 5th and then 8th and now 12th. And he was visibly downbeat at large portions of this season. And I don't think the media negativity and that vilification of him has helped. I think that's taken its toll. And it's just slightly sad that we head into another off-season talking about Newgarden needing a reset, and kind of just want to see him happy again and enjoying his racing again, because it does feel like that's continued to diminish a bit. And yeah, just been a brutal few years, really.
Okay, this is maybe the most difficult we have to tier list of all the drivers we have here. I think from a very casual standpoint, he goes straight into D or F, but I think you do have to, as we say, take a lot of context into this. No, I don't think you could say it was a good season. You know, everybody has a bit of bad luck. Obviously, his was more extreme than others. I feel like it is difficult to put him in B, considering he's a Penske driver who finished 11th in the standings, but I wouldn't be opposed to putting him in C tier.
Yeah, I'm happy putting him in C.
Okay,
I don't think he can go higher than that.
The question is where in C, though, because
it's a very wide range.
It's quite stacked at the minute. And
he probably had a more impressive year than Rossi, but I feel like a lot of Newgardens, you're still dealing in what ifs, because it's not guaranteed that he was going to go on and win these races that he was. But
I'd also say he had a better year than Ferrucci.
I agree. Yeah, maybe put behind Simpson.
Yeah. I mean, if you were to say it before Nashville, I don't know where. I think he would probably be down a few places, but I guess he won a race, which is more than can be said for most drivers on the grid. So.
Okay, let's go to David Malukas, who, if you didn't catch the news this week, has signed for Team Penske. Shock, as we had all expected or mentioned for several months. If you hadn't seen that coming, you must have been blindfolded. So we'll touch on that news briefly after we recap the season. So we'll tier this and then reflect on that news, which we had long expected, but we'll touch on it anyway. Evan, let's hear your thoughts on David Malukas' season.
I think it's quite an interesting season because the results, if you look at it on paper, a lot of it would seem a little bit disappointing considering where he started. the qualifying, I think, was sort of the show of what he can do this year. And especially, I think, the Indy 500 was a huge turning point of his season because he had to, acclimatizing to a new team with AJ Foyt Racing. And then the 500 finishing second was brilliant. He could have probably won that race. He was definitely in with a shot to do so. But if you look at after the Indy 500, including the Indy 500, actually, if you discount 3 races, the lowest position he qualified was 7th, which I think really is pretty impressive, especially considering where sort of you'd see Ferrucci in comparison. And he's always been a brilliant oval racer, which he showed again this year, which I think it's definitely something that Roger Penske has seen and loves, because obviously the Indy 500 is his bread and butter. So some disappointing results, especially towards the end of the season in comparison to where he qualified. But I don't think you could call it a bad year by any means.
If you wanted the qualifying statistics, only O'Ward and Palou had a better average qualifying position. They were the only 2 drivers to have more Fast 12 appearances than Malukas. This includes overs, by the way. Only those 2 and Herta had more Fast 6 appearances than David Malukas. And when you compare him to Ferrucci, as you said, Malukas' average qualifying position was 9.5. Ferrucci was 17.5. So on average, he qualified 8 positions better than Santino Ferrucci.
I think it's a very tough year to judge, really, because of that kind of pace and performance to results ratio. Third best qualifying average in the field, third best qualifying average on ovals as well. He was on the front row 3 times, including Detroit as well. So showing it's not just ovals. It was really 500 onwards that Malukas and the team kind of kicked on. Obviously, Ferrucci had that real hot streak and dropped off, as we spoke about last week. But yeah, those qualifying statistics, he was 12 times in the top 12, 9 times in the top 7. So he was in the top 7 over half of the races. But where he felt as though he was kind of in the position to win races, I felt he just lacked that race day execution. I know there was misfortune in there as well. Obviously, the season ending with a dose of that it was kind of 50-50 really in the end, the Foster collision, but it's certainly unfortunate to be gunning for the race lead and ultimately colliding with a back marker. So to really have ended the season with only 5 top 10s it does feel a bit of an injustice, I think, relative to his performance, because I mean the peaks were very high. He was unlucky not to have a pole. He was just beaten by 2 utterly spellbinding laps from Palou and O'Ward in those last couple of rounds, and obviously the 500 was exceptional. And I think that sort of scruffiness around the edges is natural for a driver who's still only in his 3rd full season, his fourth season if you count his 10 races with Meyer Shank. And I think he kind of understands that as well, and he's developed a lot of experience over what has been a pretty mad last 18 months. And I certainly think he was one of the fastest drivers in the field. The results in qualifying show that he's just not quite clinical enough to match that, I don't think, at the moment.
I really don't know how a driver gets 5 top 10 finishes and finishes 11th in points. I mean, the form at the start of the season was pretty catastrophic. I think we were all a bit worried for Foyt after those first 5 rounds of the season. And then Indy 500 really was a turning point. The same for Ferrucci, as we've said. And what Malukas let himself down on a few occasions. Detroit crashing into Palou was a pretty bad error. The Gateway obviously hit the wall. There was a few too many errors on those. I mean, he was unlucky to not win the second Dara race. I mean, the caution caught him out slightly there, like he did many others. So it was a bit unfortunate, but as you said, I feel like a lot of the races he lost, he does have himself to blame. So it was an odd year. Execution was a real problem for Malukas. His qualifying form was excellent, but as you said, execution was really a huge problem, and just a lack of consistency, which we know that team have from what we saw from Ferrucci last year, but Malukas didn't quite exemplify that. And I know he's not an ultra experienced driver, but it's starting to get to that stage in his career where we sort of do need to see this consistency. 3rd, 4th year driver, you're at that point where the excuses are sort of gone for inexperience. You know what it's like. You have the standards, and you have to meet them on a regular basis. And I mean, he's proven himself as a star of the future. There's no doubt about it. He will be in the series for a long, long time if he continues his trajectory. But especially when we look at a move to Penske next season, he needs to make sure he is as competitive as he shows on a week in, week out basis. Let's have a look at where we're going to put Malukas in our tier list. Again, not an easy one to rank because it was a bit of a strange season.
I'd put him in B behind VK.
I was just about to say that actually.
Okay, I was going to go behind Rasmussen.
He was quick when it didn't matter as much. When it matters and you pick up the points, just a few too many lapses, misfortune as well, but just needs to button up, I think.
It's all about expectations. This is a difficult one because you have to compare driver performance versus the actual expectation as well. And expectation was definitely higher for Malukas than maybe it was a VK or a Rasmussen. But let's quickly touch on the move to Penske, which was formally announced this week. We had known it had been in the pipeline very long, and especially after Power announced his departure to Andretti, we sort of knew what was going on without the official confirmation. But it is the official confirmation that David Malukas will take the number 12 seat, which has been occupied by Will Power since 2009, and obviously joined with Scott McLaughlin and Joseph Newgarden at the team next season. And I know Archie's done quite an in-depth piece on this, and I've shared some of my thoughts on my Will Power piece I did the other week. But, firstly, he's got some very big shoes to fill. Will Power is a two-time IndyCar champion. He's an Indy 500 champion. He's the fastest qualifier ever, and he's quite possibly Penske's most successful driver, or definitely up there, Penske's most successful drivers. So he's got big shoes to fill, firstly, and I know Penske didn't really have a choice, but it doesn't feel to me Malukas is maybe quite ready for this big move in comparison to when someone like Newgarden made the move. It felt like he was established. Malukas still isn't quite refined, I feel, in some areas, as we have literally just discussed. But there is no doubt about it. He has got an insane amount of talent, and he is the star of the future. And with the most respect to Joseph Newgarden and Scott McLaughlin, one of the things I noticed is, look, Malukas is going to have a much longer shelf life. He's 7, 8 years younger than the other two. And if Penske are looking at a long-term option, Malukas is going to be an absolute one for them. And it's quite clear that he is a driver who will be a Penske caliber. Maybe not quite ready yet. I know Penske's options after Power announced his own departure was quite limited, and their preference was Power. But obviously, his own departures have left him to choose from Malukas. And by the fact it took so long to decide, Malukas was giving him a headache quite clearly, because he is a star, as I said, a star in waiting. And it's going to be a big year. The expectation suddenly changes. You can't have these off weekends we've been mentioning. He's got to be qualifying this well every week. He's got to be at the forefront every week. He's got to be securing a first race victory next season. I'm really, really excited. It's nice to see some fresh talent in the top team, and a driver who we hope will be battling for race wins and possibly championships.
I think it's worth emphasising that point that Penske did ultimately offer Power an extra year, which does imply that Malukas probably could have done with another year of development at Foyt in an ideal world. And I think the reality now is that he's not the complete package at the moment, as much as he absolutely has the raw materials to be something very special. I mean, he's obviously shown that exceptional peak performance and pace in qualifying. He's shown potential in the race. He's just not quite a finisher in races yet, I don't think. And there's obviously, and I'd recommend going and reading my piece, because I went into a lot of depth on the site on just the whole situation, really. And there was a lot of justifiable criticism towards the manner in which Power departed the team. But that's not to say Malukas isn't or cannot grow into being a very worthy heir to Power. But the exact words that you mentioned, Dan, it's massive shoes to fill. And Malukas's current resume, 3.5 years, we'll say, into his IndyCar career, is completely dwarfed by Power's. I mean, Malukas, I think, has 16 top 10s was the statistic used in Penske's release. I mean, Power has about 3 times that in terms of wins. He has 108 podiums. It's night and day. But I also think Malukas deserves the opportunity. I'm very happy for him after what has just been a hell of an 18 months for him. Like, it was unclear if he even had a career remaining after ties were cut with Aaron McLaren, after that fateful Barber weekend when the threshold was reached after he missed too many races with the wrist injury. let alone a year and a half later being on the books of Penske now. Like, he would have been joining an Aaron McLaren squad that was pretty volatile and unstable at the time. So you could even suggest the wrist injury ended up being some sort of blessing in disguise. Not least, really, because of the fortitude and the resilience that Malukas has built up through that. And I mean, he's shown great adaptability. I mean, returning second weekend back with Meyer Shank, he qualified third. And I think those character traits and the raw skills that he has make me think he can definitely be a success at Penske. He can be a future IndyCar champion in the right environment. This is a very different environment to anything he's experienced before at some of IndyCar's smaller teams. And it almost feels like it's a case of where success was really celebrated at those teams and bad days were kind of inevitable. At Penske, the success almost becomes the expectation, and bad days are kind of minor disasters every time they come along. And thankfully, Malukas does have a multi-year deal, and I think that sort of security is completely necessary to just have that patience afforded to allow him to grow into the more complete driver that I think he will become in the years to come.
I think if you asked me at the start, well, not at the start, sort of midway through the season even, but I think it was time for Malukas to move up to Penske, I disagree. I wrote an article on it about saying why I think it would be beneficial for both parties for Power to stay. And despite that somewhat still being how I thought of it to the end of the season, definitely just the raw pace that he showed in those last few rounds, qualifying while only being beaten by some superb laps by Palou. You can't really train that into a driver. You can train consistency to a degree, but you can't find that sort of raw speed in just any driver. So I think whilst there's somewhat in Penske, they're sort of coming back to the way they were last season and started sort of the year, I think bringing someone new now bringing Malukas in is better than it would have looked towards the middle or start of the season.
We'll also quickly touch on the news which was announced on the day of recording, which was Tuesday, that Dennis Hauger has signed for Dale Coyne Racing. They now enter a technical partnership with Andretti Global for the 2025 season, 2026 season, I should say, with Hauger effectively being on a loan from Andretti with the vision of moving him into the main team for 2026, which puts Marcus Ericsson in a bit of an awkward situation for next year, but we'll see how that pans out. Obviously, Hauger was the Indy Next champion in quite dominant fashion. It was a really impressive season. The only thing that maybe let him down was his oval form, but it was his first season on ovals. That was completely expected. And if you do want to hear more from Dennis, he joined us twice on the show this year, including just a couple of weeks ago. So it's definitely worth listening to that if you want to hear his reflections on that Indy Next season. But it's been a really superb year, as we said, in Indy Next for Hauger, and this move was inevitable. It's just a case of where and when, not necessarily if you make the move up. And it's a richly deserved move. I think he is, again, somebody who will be a big factor in IndyCar in years to come. I mean, he was an F3 champion at a very young age. I think he was just 17 or 18 when he won that F3 championship, part of the Red Bull team. And you sort of said F2 wasn't for him, but it's really seemed to find a home in Indy Next. And I'm glad he's got that progression to IndyCar. And because we can see what Indy Next champions can do. Pato O'Ward, Carl Kirkwood, Christian Rasmussen, just in recent years, and look how they're performing at a race-winning level in 2025. And I think Dennis Hauger has certainly got the capability to do that in a couple of years' time. And I like this new Coyne Andretti partnership. I think that's really big for the team, for Coyne, because they're going to get the resources that they've always struggled with, and we know they've got that extra funding from Todd next season as well. So looking really positive at the minute for Dale Coyne Racing. And the second seat is obviously a bit up in the air. I know we've heard suggestions that could be Romain Grosjean in that seat to partner Hauger, but really exciting times really for both Hauger finally making a step up to IndyCar, which is very deserved, and for Dale Coyne Racing having a really high talented driver on the books for the first time in a couple of seasons.
I was really impressed with the way that Hauger came into the IndyCar ladder in Indy Next when he was searching for opportunities in IndyCar. Ultimately, budget meant that was not to happen. And I just like the way he really showed the necessary respect to Indy Next, obviously coming over as a driver with a lot of pedigree from Europe, obviously a former member of the Red Bull Academy as well. He could have really seen Indy Next as, I don't know, just not respected it in the way he did. I think some other drivers may not have put in the the work ethic that Hauger did. I think his work ethic was outstanding. The amount of, I mean, he told us he left no stone unturned. He was watching video upon video upon video all year before he came over to make sure that he knew every track, because all the tracks were unfamiliar, but he made sure that by the time he visited each track, he knew every little nook and cranny of them all. And I thought that was really, really impressive. And obviously he's an extremely skilled driver, but I don't think it was any coincidence really that someone that showed that sort of commitment succeeded as he did in his rookie season. And I mean, he didn't just succeed, he was utterly dominant really from the outset. He adapted so quickly to win a flurry of races in those early rounds. I think he's really built the foundations across the year to become a very successful IndyCar driver. I think he's about as prepared as he could possibly be, and he's housed at a team that's obviously famed for nurturing its young talent. And Alex Palou was at Dale Coyne Racing for his rookie year, and look where that's led him. So, yeah, I think it's good that he's maintained that relationship with Andretti. I mean, he told us that was his preference, and it probably does speak to Coyne being a bit of a stopgap. Maybe just give a bit of further education, particularly on that oval side of things, before possibly stepping up to Andretti in 27. Obviously, a bit like what we saw in 21 and into 22 with Kirkwood going from Foyt to Andretti. And
yeah, I think it's easy to forget, given the way how Formula 2 worked out for him in the end, that before that he was touted as the next big thing, the next possible future F1 world champion. And now, a few years later down the line, coming to Indy next and still not feeling like Archie said, like he's too big for it, or it's not, well, just not taking it for granted, basically. And I think that sort of reaction is something that will treat him very well in a main seat in IndyCar, as the series itself is probably one of the most challenging in world motorsports.
Kirkwood is out of contract next year as well, so if he decides to go somewhere else, obviously Ericsson's could be safe. But anyway, we'll speak about that in the future. Let's go to number 10, who was mine and Archie's pre-season champion pick. And Scott McLaughlin clearly didn't fare out too well, considering we had a 0 after the 1 that we predicted him to finish. And we've spoken about Team Penske's pitiful so much on this podcast, we don't need to go over it again. But I feel like McLaughlin, out of the 3 drivers this season, was actually maybe arguably the weakest. I feel like the pure pace that we've seen from him in other years, the really impressive form we saw from him on ovals, particularly last year, didn't really correlate to this season, which was really disappointing. And there's 2 moments, I think, for me, that really define McLaughlin's season. Number 1 is the crash in the Indy 500. I mean, that's about as low as it gets, really, for an IndyCar driver, crashing on the pace laps of the Indy 500 all by yourself in a very, very, very quick car, which, let's not forget, he'd crashed a week earlier. The other one is the crash in Iowa qualifying, where Penske, it was the 1 weekend Penske season, we looked like could turn around. They looked really quick. It looked like they could finally claim first rookie of the year, and it was a track McLaughlin had won that last season, and it was the qualifying where it dictated your performance for 2 races, and McLaughlin binned it in the opening lap. I know he had a good recovery race 1, but race 2, because he qualified down there, he was caught out by Devin DeFrancesco's accident. The 2 of them had several bust-ups across the course of the year, but we won't get into that too much. But as I said, McLaughlin's qualifying pace wasn't too bad. He qualified 11th, which I think is it's not great. It's the 9th best in the field, actually. It is better than Newgarden's, worse than Powers, and he did obviously get that pole in St. Petersburg, which started the season off really well. But he sort of went through a mid-season phase, especially in qualifying, where he did really struggle. And as I said, the raw pace we really saw from him last year, which made both myself and you, Archie, feel like, 1, he was our driver of the season last year, and 2, that he'd be a champion this year, because he just shows so much pace on every single type of track. That really didn't convert at all this year. There wasn't really any weekend, apart from maybe that St. Petersburg weekend, where McLaughlin felt like one of the quickest drivers. Like, I know he had quiet podiums in Alabama, Milwaukee, and Nashville. All of them were fairly anonymous runs to third places. But it didn't feel like there were many standout weekends, which is kind of what we're used to seeing from McLaughlin. And I think the progress he's made year on year to this point was so impressive, which is why this season was just such a great disappointment.
I came away from last year thinking he was probably the quickest outright guy in the field. I mean, he's come off. I mean, this felt like it was reverting to his rookie season in some ways, and I think of all the misfortune that struck Penske, I do think McLaughlin was probably the scruffiest of them all in terms of just not quite executing on a race weekend himself. I know he also had his bouts of bad luck. I'm not doubting that, but I also think it was, just a downturn in performance. I mean, he was fourth, third in the championship in his second, third, and fourth years, not just in IndyCar, but as an open wheel driver. He was the top Penske guy in the championship the last couple of years, and we just didn't see that this year. I mean, the two moments you picked out, Indy 500 crashing before the race was, I mean, it was just a torturous moment. It was soul destroying, and Iowa qualifying was the other big mishap, really, that I feel like we just haven't seen in recent years, that sort of moment from McLaughlin. And I thought he ended the year on a bit of a better note, 4 top 10s, a couple of third place finishes to round out the season. And it also started pretty well. I mean, he was in the top 5, I think, in the first 4 times, or maybe the top 6 4 times in the first 5 races. So, yeah, the only race he wasn't there was the one where he got absolutely speared by DeFrancesco before the race, and his hybrid went boom. But he also qualified early. Yeah,
much last.
That was like,
wasn't it? Weird trend.
That was Penske's like most disastrous week. That kind of set the tone, didn't it? Really, that thermal weekend, because they all qualified awfully.
If I had a nickel for each time that Scott McLaughlin qualified very poorly and then got caught out by Devin DeFrancesco's stupidity, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird it happened twice.
Yeah,
I think even sort of being in a position to find yourself having 2 separate incidents and fighting twice with Devlin DeFrancesco on and off the track sort of sums up his season as a whole, because coming into the season, both of you had him as your champion. Unlike Newgarden, the pace to win the race hasn't really come. So it'll definitely be interesting at the start of the season, seeing if he starts it the way he did this season, which I can't see personally, but I think next year will be super important for his career.
I think it was particularly the middle phase of the season where it just went completely all over the place. But I do agree that he just didn't have the peaks that even Newgarden and Power had, and that certainly, as we mentioned, we've been used to from McLaughlin. We didn't really see it at any point this season, I didn't think, particularly. I mean, he was on pole in St. Pete, and it never really got better than that.
Yeah, I mean, he got unlucky that time with the strategy, but yeah.
Yeah, he probably should have won that race, but then it was kind of a little bit down from there.
Okay, I feel this is a very, very difficult one to tier. I personally think he had a worse year than Newgarden, and maybe quite significantly worse than Newgarden, when considered all of Newgarden's horrific luck. Now, I'm tempted to put this in D, but I think that's unfair.
I don't think it's unfair. I think if you're taking expectation into account, like our personal expectation, I'd put him in
okay,
D.
Actually, I'm not against that.
It's just seeing him so close to Graham Rahal, I find just...
It was a bit weird, but
bizarre.
lower than Connor Daly, Callum Ilott, and Louis Foster. But again, you have to compare it to expectation, I think.
Exactly.
It does depend whether, again, like we're saying, a lot of it is depending on the expectation. If you're looking at purely based on how he performed, he still did okay. He still got multiple podiums. But the expectation part, I think, is really the key thing there. And
it feels harsh because I don't think he was that much worse than Newgarden. But I think it's just simply the fact that this is the guy we were. It's kind of
Newgarden had a lot of pace, but McLaughlin didn't have the pace.
Yeah, I think in our podcast microcosm, he's almost shot himself in the foot because he was so highly valued after last season that it's been such a...
We were the only ones saying last season how good McLaughlin was.
I think we're somewhat angry here on sort of one side of the podcast that their predictions didn't come quite so true.
Yeah, that's part of it.
Well, we haven't mentioned my very bad prediction surrounding Scott McLaughlin. So move on swiftly to ninth place in the championship.
No. McLaughlin's winning every oval race, right?
No, I didn't say that.
Next year?
Anyway, let's move on. Ninth in the championship. Will Power his final season with Team Penske. We don't need to go into this loads because me and Archie have discussed our thoughts on this quite significantly, but he was the best Penske in qualifying across the course of the year. He was the one to finally put them in victory lane after 15 races this season. His overall finish this season, I believe, was the best average finish of any Penske this season. He had the joint most in every statistic of any Penske driver this season. It still wasn't a good season. Let's make that abundantly clear. And he had a lot of misfortune like the other ones did. St. Petersburg, I know, was partially his fault, but it was a bit of a racing incident. And then mechanical failure at Gateway, mechanical failure at Mid-Ohio, mechanical failure at Iowa. He obviously crashed by himself in Milwaukee, and obviously that pit lane mess at Nashville is probably the best way of putting it. There was a few errors by Power towards the end of the season, but he did get caught out a lot of time like all the other Penske drivers did through luck. But I think it's safe to say Power had the best season of any Penske driver and was the most consistent across the course of the year. So I'm glad he got that last win at Penske. That's one thing that I'm glad he did. Like he knew at that point it'd probably be his last win at Penske, and I'm glad. I know publicly you couldn't celebrate it like that, but at least I know inside he did. So just an odd year, just a really odd year for Penske. And as me and Archie have said many, many times, the way his 17 season tenure at Penske didn't really end in the ceremonious and the glamorous way it should have done. And that was very underwhelming. And I know it was because Power walked rather than there sort of being a mutual agreement to leave the team. Which is a shame, but that's not to take away from what's been a 17 fantastic seasons with Penske. And as I said, I'm glad that at least he got himself in victory lane at one point this season.
It was quite a scrappy season, as we sort of touched upon in multiple times. But I think I don't want to mention it because it's brought up so often in motorsport, but with age, it's often expected that pace is also... Well, as the age goes up, sort of the pace sort of goes down. But I think we have seen throughout this season that Will Power still does have the pace. He isn't the record number of pole sitter for nothing. I think he still has a lot more to show. And it was disappointing when I saw that he didn't stay with Penske. Again, his own part of it is his own choice. But I think it's a brilliant pickup by Andretti, and especially... having lost Colton Herta, who's, again, one of the fastest over a single lap, I think it's a pretty, in a sense, quite a good like-for-like replacement. And you've got an incredibly fast driver who, again, can get in some unfortunate situations. So I think if he'll have a whole lot to share with that team as well, it being one of the elder statesmen of the sport. There'll be, I think, a lot that he can bring over from Penske that will help the Andretti organization, which I am quite excited to see.
Power actually ended the season with one fewer top 10 finish than McLaughlin did. He had 8, McLaughlin had 9. And he actually almost was caught in the championship, but I do wonder those final 2 races were pretty scruffy for Power, but I wonder whether that's a bit understandable given it was all unravelling a bit with his career there, and we obviously have later learned that by that point he'd made his decision about his future. But yeah, I think he did have his doses of misfortune. I think that Mid-Ohio, Iowa streak where he had 2 engine failures in 2 weekends was pretty laughable, to be honest. It was, again, kind of a nice little summary of Penske's year, but otherwise he was quick. Like, I think early in the season he put in some particularly good race day drives where he actually was weirdly off-colour in qualifying to start the season. I remember Thermal particularly where overtaking was difficult, and he ended up, I think, finishing 6th, having started pretty far down the order. And yeah, I think he definitely did validate those claims that he keeps making, that he's still performing kind of as well as he ever has done in his career, despite turning 45 at the start of next season. But yeah, it all feels a bit futile reflecting too deeply on Penske Power, doesn't it? Given, well, this is all over now. I'm more just excited to bring on next season and see what he can bring to that Andretti squad, because I think he is an upgrade on Herta, and I'm just glad he's landed on his feet at the age that he is and gets that top opportunity. It feels like it would have been deeply unfair if he didn't.
Okay, we've all agreed that Power is going to be the top Penske in our list, but where does he go in our overall tier list? I don't know.
He goes
C,
for me.
B?
He goes top of C above Simpson.
Yeah, I would agree.
I can agree with that. Excellent. Okay, let's move on to number 8. And you barely recognised he was here because it was Marcus Armstrong. We barely recognised his existence all season long, as became a bit of a running theme of this podcast. But we have touched on it. I know we put a bit of detail at Nashville, but 11 top 10s across the course of the year in his first year for Meyer-Shank Racing. I know it was effectively just a extra Ganassi car with Meyer-Shank branding on it, but it was an impressive season nonetheless. Qualifying wise, he qualified an average of 11th with 12 fast or top 12 appearances, which again, very strong. And it's strange because there weren't really many highlights for Marcus Armstrong at all this season. I mean, there was the obvious podium at Iowa, but even then I feel like it was a bit overshadowed because he just got so fortunate with the caution late on. But it was the sort of Marcus Ericsson style, as we've been saying, just the ability to rack up top 10s, seemingly out of nowhere, having quiet days, which is what you're looking for in a driver. And there wasn't the flashy moments that we've never really seen big moments from Marcus Armstrong in his IndyCar. He's just this ability to consistently pick up results in a front-running midfield car is mightily impressive, and the consistency is absolutely there, which is maybe why people are touting him as a future Ganassi driver. And I know, well, I say he was previously a Ganassi driver, but to inherit the Dixon seat in the future. So just a really nice, impressive season, a really well-rounded season. I've been impressed by Armstrong. Maybe my only slight criticism is we didn't see those magical moments we did of maybe a Rasmussen or a VK or a Simpson. But still a really strong season nonetheless.
I mean, he was a big unknown quantity coming into this year. I think we were all pretty unsure what his ceiling was, but he made a pretty big leap from what was a decent but fairly mediocre, unremarkable first full season with Ganassi last year. And I know the continuity on the engineering side with the newfound alliance with Ganassi and Meyer-Shank probably helped the transition a bit, but I still think it was particularly impressive from him and the Meyer-Shank team, who, let's face it, were already on an upwards path with the Andretti alliance before switching paths this season. And for me, I think Armstrong did emerge as a possible Dixon successor this year. I think it was very Dixon-y the way he kind of went about his business. He wasn't always the quickest. There were some real peaks of pace in there, but he just always found a way, didn't he, in that, as we coined it, the Armstrong ability way. He was methodical, he was clean, and he was always in the game at the end of races. He had that kind of consistent ability just to churn out results. I mean, his 11 top 10s was more than Rosenqvist, one more than his much more experienced teammate managed. And he ended the season with only 2 non-top 10 results in the final 11 races, which was a pretty impressive run. And I know he maybe got to the podium in a pretty fortuitous manner, but the Iowa podium, I think, was probably deserved because he's already looked pretty comfortable in only his second year racing on ovals as well. I think he's got to raise the peaks a bit, but he looks like a pretty complete driver, I think, already.
I think with Armstrong, it'll be a difficult one to grade in a sense, because we've talked about it so much about the expectation compared to how they performed. But coming into the season, I genuinely didn't know what to expect from Marcus Armstrong, because his first 2 seasons were so, I don't know, unremarkable in a sense that, I don't know, that sounds quite harsh, but I never really thought coming into a weekend, Marcus Armstrong's going to be one of the ones to watch here. But yeah, I think he's definitely shone in a sense, in that he has the consistency that some drivers, for Malukas' example, they've almost been in the series for a similar amount of time. Armstrong has got this sort of consistency and stability, whereas he may not have the same pace. That being said, looking at sort of his qualifying and the race, I find it quite interesting. The races, qualifying where he's had sort of his highest qualifying positions, when sort of St. Pete and Toronto, they've been some of the races where he's had his worst results, which I think is definitely an interesting one. And the way, there's sort of the Dixon-y way that we've said that you can just start quite low down the field, but just sort of sneak up the pack.
Okay, Marcus Armstrong. Not the easy one. I feel like for me, he's locked in for B.
He goes top of B for me.
You goes top. Okay.
Yeah. I had him in my rankings as my 6th best driver of the season.
I'm okay with that. Okay, let's go on to Colton Herta, his final season in IndyCar for the foreseeable future. Archie, you give us your thoughts on Colton Herta's 2025.
I mean, it feels a bit weird to discuss him because none of it really matters, does it? Like, I mean, for the foreseeable future, like, I know he's not closed any doors to a return in the longer term, but IndyCar's not going to be on his radar. It's all full focus on F2 and ultimately trying to get to F1. And as we said at the time, good luck to him. But yeah, just reflecting on this year, I think it felt like a bit of a regression after what was a very impressive upturn in 2024 after those barren few seasons. It felt like almost the return of the Herta that was so heavily hyped in the early days of his IndyCar career. I know he ultimately finished 2nd in points, having not really actually been a part of the championship picture, and the way Nashville panned out and he won that race, the finale, that was why he ended up 2nd best to power and that's why he ended up 2nd best to Palou in 24. But yeah, any consistency and return to that kind of race winning caliber almost kind of just diminished really in 25. Even his often reliable qualifying pace seemed to fade into quite a bit of unreliability as the year went on, and it just became very hard to know what you were going to get from Herta on any given weekend, which felt like it was not the case in 24 for the first time in a few years. And I think ultimately across the course of the season he was quite comprehensively outshone by Kyle Kirkwood, and as I mentioned, it feels like it's probably not that unpopular a take. Will Power is quite a significant upgrade on him for next season.
I don't know. It's definitely a disappointing season considering, well, I think quite a few people would have been hoping for a title challenge, especially considering what we've seen the year previous. But yeah, it's a difficult one because he probably could have or should have even won twice this year. We saw in Detroit qualified on pole, obviously, and sort of not by his own mistake, but in the same time, he should have won it, and he quite easily could have, if not for few little, kind of errors. But Toronto was sort of his to lose, and that was out of his control. That was unfortunate, but he still clearly has the pace. I think it was quite unfortunate that on the weekends where Andretti as a team didn't have the pace, which was quite a lot this year, which I thought was a big shock. He was, I think, considerably the fastest over those weekends where they didn't have sort of the race-winning pace, which I think would hurt his sort of stock in this sense because, well, they didn't have the car to fight for it, yet he was still outperforming his teammates in that sense.
I just think after 7 years, there's no doubting he's been one of the most talented drivers in the IndyCar field since he joined the series. After the amount of time he's been there, I think you would have expected him to be a much more reliable package than he's been. And I also think, in fairness to him, the team is still a bit too scruffy at times. I mean, there was so many times things were going wrong in pit lane, and that was sometimes his doing, that was sometimes slow stops. It was just all sorts going wrong again. And I thought that had been cut out last year, which evidently wasn't the case. And that probably did bite him a bit this year too.
The way I'd put it, the way I was going to put it is, for a 7th year IndyCar driver, 6 of those at Andretti, to have less than half your finishes inside the top 10 is probably quite disappointing. And Herta, 2 mechanical failures, but there was no other race that I can see that he got taken out through some sort of incident. He did interestingly have a better average finish and a better average qualifying than Kirkwood. In fact, only Palou actually beat him for top 6 qualifying results. But the way I'd see it is Herta's been someone touted with talent for years. So is someone like Pato O'Ward. Pato O'Ward has converted this talent into results and is proving that he, if it wasn't for Palou, could well be an IndyCar champion. I don't see that from Colton Herta. because there's just no consistency week in, week out. Street course package, fantastic. Oval package, goodness knows. Road course package, who knows what it's going to be like. I think a lot of that is down to Andretti. We saw that on Ericsson's side, and I think towards the end of the season, we definitely saw that on the Kirkwood side as well. But there's just not that consistency from Herta. You don't know what Colton Herta you're going to get every given weekend. And they're just, I feel like after 7 seasons, I want to see him regularly fighting for a championship. But disappointing 22, disappointing 23, really good 24, disappointing 25. Even year to year, there's no form. And I think it's a bit of a shame that we'll never see a complete season from Colton Herta until maybe he returns one day in the future. But let's have a look at where we're going to put him into our tier list. Again, another difficult one. We're having a lot of drivers who finished decently in points, but we don't think had absolutely outstanding seasons. So where does Colton go for this one?
Is it too harsh to put him behind Newgarden?
I'm fine with that.
I'd put him behind Newgarden.
We'll move on to Felix Rosenqvist and his 2025 season, obviously his second year of Meyershank Racing. I really don't know how he finished 6th in points. It's one of those mysteries this year where people just ended up in the wrong place in the point standings. Like, how did Rosenqvist finish 6th? Like, I don't think he had an outstanding year by really many means, but still finished 6th in points. But I think his consistency at the start of the year, similar to what he did in 2024, was really, really impressive. I mean, he had 4 top 5 finishes in the first half of the season. Unfortunately, like last year, I feel like the form tailed off a little bit towards the second half of the season, which was a bit disappointing. But he did eventually recover to 2nd points. It was very, very close between him and Scott McLaughlin. 10th was actually only a 16-point gap in the end. And obviously, his year was really highlighted by that podium in Road America. And that was his first in Meyershank Racing, which I know we said at the time, and myself and Archie, that how was it his first? He's driven so well for the team, but he just can't convert that into results. So I'm glad he got that podium. But it's just a bit of a weird year qualifying-wise. He was actually pretty strong. He was the 5th fastest qualifier in average and reached the fast 12 on 12 occasions. Obviously, reached the front row on 1 occasion across the course of the year, which he achieved in Iowa alongside Alex Palou for race 2. He's been struck forward pretty well in the last couple of years, and you can see the development that they've made of Rosenqvist in that team. And to have a car in 6th and 8th in the standings is really, really strong. And it's been a good year for Rosenqvist. Again, I feel like maybe we need to see more podium from more peaks. But, I mean, to finish 6th in the standings, and we don't really know how, must be a pretty decent thing here today. I mean, his average finishing position was about 12, which isn't too bad. But he had less top 10 finishes than Armstrong. He must have had more top 5s. Yeah, 2 more top 5s than Armstrong across the course here, which maybe explains that a little bit. But it was all very close in that pack, as we said.
Yeah, I mean, it's strange because you wouldn't expect, having watched the whole season, you wouldn't have expected Rosenqvist to be 6th in the standings. And if you looked at it maybe before the season, you'd think, oh wow, he's had a pretty good season. But in reality, it's been kind of, I don't know. We haven't really talked about him much personally. It's been sort of. That's been the case for the whole of Meyershank Racing season. And if anything, I think Marcus Armstrong has been the one that people say has probably had a better season purely for his consistency, if not anything, which I think is a weird one considering, especially the start of last season, the pace that we saw from Rosenqvist. You would expect for the second year, and with the collaboration with Chip Ganassi Racing, you'd expect it to be a lot better than what we have seen, which is, again, weird to say.
I think how impressive this year has actually been has somehow been allowed to go a bit under the radar because, I mean, 6th in points is the best by a mile that's ever been achieved by a Meyershank driver. I mean, Rosenqvist's 12th last year, I'm pretty sure, was the previous best for the team. And I mean, for a team that's had a pretty limited time with only 2 cars, double top 10 in points, 6th and 8th, I think their previous best across 2 cars was 15th and 18th. So this time 2 years ago, this is a team that only had 1 top 10 result across the course of the entire season across 2 cars. Here we are talking about 21 combined top 10 results across 2 cars, which is pretty impressive stuff. I know Rosenqvist's headline was obviously that podium at Road America. He was probably unfortunate not to win that race, really. I mean, he put in a good enough drive for that, I felt like. And I think he had a little bit of the same drop off that he had in 24, and just some strange weekends, I'd say, in that second half of the season. But he managed to recover that a bit and not allow quite as dramatic a slip as we saw from him last year. And yeah, I mean, he's leveled his best championship finish that he had as a rookie with Ganassi, which was obviously the pre-aero screen era, so quite a while ago. The first time he's beaten a full season teammate in the championship as well. And I think he's relishing being that bit more of a focal point in the team rather than maybe hidden away kind of alongside a lead driver or two at Ganassi or Aaron McLaren.
Okay, Fro, where is he going? I don't think he had as good of a season as his teammate did.
No, I agree. Like, I mean, as I said, Armstrong had one top 10 more, so.
Above Rasmussen, I'd personally say below.
Oh, I'd go above Rasmussen. I think it's finished 60 points. I think it's, yeah, definitely.
I find it quite funny seeing all this and then just Takuma Sato popping up at the end. We've gone over everyone's sort of season and then he's just there on one race. I find it quite interesting.
Let's go to the top 5 with Christian Lundgaard, his first season at Aaron McLaren. Evan, give us your thoughts on Christian Lundgaard's year.
I think it's sort of a season of two tales this year for Lundgaard. He again, much has been talked about of his issues that he's had on ovals, just not really having the pace. But when you compare that to like his road and street course finishes, it's a difficult one, I think, because if we really want to see Lundgaard challenge for the title anytime soon, I think it's not going to be something that's going to be able to happen purely based on his lack of oval performance, especially considering Aaron McLaren had a pretty decent oval package this year. Based on the road and street course performances, I'd say he's been one of the best drivers in the field and one of the most consistent and one of definitely the ones with the most pure pace, which I think is something I've highlighted a lot throughout this sort of podcast, but it is really important. And we've seen a lot of that, especially in the races, which is, again, where most of the points are dished out. So that's important. But I think next year we need to see more on the ovals. Otherwise, well, there'll be huge question marks over that in terms of whether he's championship pedigree.
I think it's been a brilliant season, personally. I mean, we had no idea how it would pan out, really, given the previous kind of history of how Pato O'Ward's teammates have performed. And I personally would cut him some slack on ovals because, yes, okay, it's still preventing him from feeling like a properly complete championship contending force. But as he's kind of documented throughout the season, RLL's package was so bad and the balance was so bad and the cars were so slow. He's having to relearn it this year with a properly competitive car. And I think qualifying third in Nashville, obviously, unfortunately, had a mechanical in that race, was kind of a sign for me that, I mean, he's still got a way to go in terms of racecraft, but at least the pace is there, where it wasn't even in the earlier parts of the season. But yeah, I mean, none of O'Ward's teammates had previously finished better than 8th in the championship. Lundgaard ended the season 5th, and I mean, without that mechanical in Nashville, he could easily have been on the podium for the championship, which would have been seriously impressive. And I mean, looking at road and street course, he brought the fight to O'Ward in a way that I don't think any of O'Ward's teammates have ever done during his IndyCar career at Aaron McLaren so far. And it's the first time in the relative infancy still of this team that they've had two options, two cars fighting at the front on a regular basis. And I think aside from a bit of a lull in that mid-season patch, I think he was extremely consistent. I mean, 11 times in the top 8 and split the podiums with O'Ward. Obviously didn't have the couple of wins that O'Ward had, but I think being on the podium 5 times in the 7 road course rounds was a particularly noteworthy stat for Lundgaard. I think Pelot was 7 from 7, so they took up 12 of the podium positions of 12 of the 21 podium positions on road courses this year, which was quite amusing.
I think the last 2 over the races of the year kind of relaxed my concern about Lundgaard and ovals really massively. His run at Milwaukee was solid. I didn't qualify very well, but he ran well for the majority of the race. And Nashville was a really superb race until he had that mechanical failure. I don't really remember Lundgaard making loads and loads of mistakes. I know he had a bit of a messy Road America weekend, and he obviously crashed in qualifying in Long Beach, which turned out to be a blessing in disguise, actually, which which is a bit odd. But I mean, he really took the fight to award in the way we didn't expect him to, and I think he will be a championship contender in years to come. I'm not saying being an IndyCar champion, but I think he'll be up there. And we look at someone take the fight to Pelot. I think he's the closest on road courses. It generally felt like he maybe had the edge over O'Ward on road courses, looking back across the year. And a lot of his drives to the podiums were superb. I feel really bad he didn't get a win. He deserved a win this year. Like, it always Pelot was better than him, and therefore he didn't get any victories, which was a bit of a shame for Lundgaard. We look at someone take the fight to Pelot. And I think, at least on road courses, I think Christian Lundgaard is most primed to do that. And as I said, I was surprised he had such a not such an him and O'Ward were similarly matched, but I feel like generally maybe he had a bit more race pace than O'Ward did on road courses across the course. And he obviously claimed that phantom pole in Portland as well, which was fantastic to see. So I don't really have much discussion here. I think he's got to go straight an A tier for me.
Absolutely.
Okay, we move on to the final 4 drivers, and we'll kick off with Kyle Kirkwood. Archie, you can lead us way for Kyle Kirkwood.
I think if you zoom out and look at Kirkwood's season as a whole, I mean, you have to say it was extremely strong. It continues what has been a very steady upwards trajectory in the championship. And I mean, he was 11th in that first season with Andretti, in a season where it felt like he was inconsistent, but obviously had the big peaks in those 2 wins in that sophomore season. And then the year after jumps up 4 positions without those same peaks, but this being 2024 was extremely consistent. And particularly for the early part of the season, it felt like he kind of tied and knitted all of that together. I mean, obviously second most wins in the field with his 3 victories. And I just feel like what felt like a bit of a runaway train earlier in the year, and clear second best to Pelot, kind of derailed a bit from Iowa onwards. Iowa was a little bit of a messy weekend. He obviously had the infamous highline practice crash, Dan, as we like to bring up, when he was running 4th, as everyone who listens to the podcast will know. And from that point on, he was in the top 10 only twice in the final 8 races. He finished 16th or worse 4 times. And I just think some scruffiness crept in. I mean, particularly in qualifying, there were just a few little errors. Nothing like major, but he wasn't quite executing on the level that felt very Pelot-like in the early part of the season. I know Laguna Seca as a race was particularly messy, and Andretti, as Evan, you kind of mentioned earlier, their package struggled a bit in the latter stages of the season as well, whether the occasional road course round, or particularly on the ovals compared to where they were in 24. And suddenly O'Ward took over as Pelot's closest challenger, and Kirkwood kind of faded a bit. So I think the ending of his season taints his year a little bit. I think it really turns it into a season of 2 halves, an exceptional start to the season, a pretty disappointing second part. But I still say it's overall positive to be 4th in points. Is yet more progress, and I don't have massive concern with how it ended. I think Andretti just collectively need to make a bit of a step forward.
Yeah, I mean, if you discount, I say, the disqualification for the 500, he would have been incredibly close with Alex Pelot on points, given the first half of the season. And I think his only podiums in this season came in the form of wins, which I think isn't too bad a stat to have. But yeah, as you said, Archie, tale of 2 seasons, really, because it's difficult, I think, because he was so bright at the start, and then as soon as Andretti sort of fell off performance-wise, so did his performance. I don't know whether that was just due to sort of losing the gap to Pelot, and I don't know, maybe it sort of going downwards, and maybe it was a mental thing, who knows. I imagine him being quite a strong driver mentally, but yeah, disappointing second half to the season is all I can really add to that.
I know it means absolutely nothing now, but in my mind, I feel like Kirkwood took a step over her to the season, and actually when I looked at an entire Andretti outfit, I actually think Kirkwood might be the more reliable preferred driver. I know it means nothing now considering her has left the sport, but I can't really recall Kirkwood making any major errors, which you can't necessarily say on the Herta side. And Kirkwood, I know, as we said, tailed off, but he had a level of consistency that maybe Herta doesn't have, as well as having those peaks. I think Andretti's over package really isn't that good, to be completely honest, which means I don't really know how he won Gateway, to be honest, but it's one of those. We don't really know how many things happened this season. But he really maximised the package when it was strong at the start of the year. And I remember mid-season review, he was unanimously, by a mile, the second best driver of the season behind Pelot to that point. So it's a bit weird his average finish was behind Herta, but I think that was quite inflated by that 500 phantom penalty, which put him to the back of the field. So that was a bit of a shame, because that was probably a good 30 points lost there, which would have ultimately cost him third in the championship, I believe. But a great year. We've seen he can combine consistency with peaks. And again, we say someone take the fight to Pelot. I don't see why it couldn't be Kirkwood in a lot of the circuits next season. Maybe ovals aren't quite there, but if the package is underneath him, I think he's a driver certainly capable of doing so. Now let's have a look at the tier list. I know generally the season, as we said last week, I think Kirkwood's had a better year than Lundgaard. Archie thinks it's vice versa. So Evan, you will have the deciding vote on whether he goes above or below Christian Lundgaard.
Right. I think that's based on the second half of the season, I'd say below. But I really do think it'll be interesting now seeing him go into next year. I'd say he is probably, well, Power's new to the team, so I'd say he's probably the de facto team leader now Herta's gone, because when Herta was there, I feel like Andretti was always his team. But now he's gone, I feel like it's really, if not ever, it's time for sort of Kirkwood to show that he can challenge Pelot if Andretti give him the car to.
Top three in points. We'll start with Scott Dixon, who, as Chip Ganassi said, had the most anonymous run to third place in the championship ever. And we've still been trying to diagnose why. We have. It's because outside the Indy 500, his worst finish was 12th across the course of the year. He finished top 10 in 12 races across the course of the year. So just not having really many bad days really helped Dixon, and that's the level of consistency you need in IndyCar. But he doesn't have the peaks we usually have with Scott Dixon. And he claimed one victory this season, but if Alex Pelot didn't make the most un-Alex Pelot of errors, we would have had a winless Scott Dixon season, which is a really remarkable thing to say. He was only on the podium 3 times, and one of those other ones was that extremely fortunate Iowa late caution mess where he cycled to second place behind Pelot. It was an odd year for Dixon because we always rely on him to pull the rabbit out of the hat on strategy to usually win races, but it didn't feel like it felt like he was trying stuff quite a lot, but it never really seemed to work greatly. I mean, Road America is the one that really springs to mind, is he was having a good run, but had to go another 2-3 laps more than everyone else, and it didn't work. And in Mid-Ohio, it sort of worked to the end, obviously after Pelot's mistake. So just a bit of a weird year. I mean, it was consistent, but like it wasn't spectacular. He got 6 top 5s across the course of the year, which isn't, by Scott Dixon standards, isn't outstanding. It's just a very weird year where he's finished well in points just because he's Scott Dixon, hasn't made very many bad errors and hasn't had very many bad days. But by Dixon's standards, it just doesn't feel like it's a good season. And I think you have to, some of that accounts to how dominant Pelot has been in the same team as him.
I feel like he was often on the back foot, and he was often having to go for these Hail Marys, as you say, weren't always working out. And I think for a driver that only had one result worse than 12th, it's one of the most bizarrely just quiet individual seasons. And that makes it quite a hard season to evaluate because, especially with it being Dixon, how do you contextualize it? Because on one hand, you can kind of credit his consistency in a season where it felt like there was all sorts of chaos unfolding through the field, and it was just a generally pretty funky season. But on the other hand, it's a 6-time champion we're talking about, and he's been outclassed by his teammate by 259 points, despite finishing every race. And his only really real stroke of misfortune being the 500, where he still ends up finishing 20th. So, yeah, against the field, it's a good season. But, I mean, he was even some way off O'Ward in second. So it's just been middle of nowhere, really.
I feel it's a sign of a good driver when you're, well, say a good driver, he's probably one of the greatest of all time. When you're saying third place in the standings is not really a good season. And it kind of wasn't, considering what we're expecting from him. Again, he got a win, which is super important, but I don't know. The pace didn't seem to be as there as it has been in previous seasons, but as long as he continues to be Scott Dixon and just relentless in his consistency, I can't see him sort of dropping the same way that we have seen from, I don't know, other drivers or other teams. I don't know. It's a difficult one to judge, really, but I feel it would be very unfair to call it a bad season.
Across the course of the last decade, Dixon has never been the quickest guy, has he? And you never go into a weekend where Scott Dixon is de facto the quickest, like you have a Palou or a Herta or an O'Ward on occasions. And I know they changed the strategy, the race lengths this year to stop these weird strategies happening, which kind of didn't really help Scott Dixon, I think, in many ways. So maybe IndyCar's plan sort of worked there. But anyway, let's put him into a tier list. Now, this is not the easiest one, like we've said for many today. I feel like it's kind of got to be above Armstrong.
Yeah, I wouldn't put him in A, but I think, I'd put him above Armstrong in B. That sounds
because
fair.
Him and Armstrong, in some ways, had a very similar season where there weren't many massive peaks, but they didn't really do loads wrong either. So very comparable seasons, obviously, just in slightly different machinery. But let's round off with the top two in the championship. Me and Archie have given our thoughts on O'Ward and Palou quite in depth last week, so we'll try not to, or 2 weeks ago, so we won't try and repeat what we said there. But we'll start off with O'Ward season. Obviously, his best ever championship finishing position in second, highlighted by 2 wins and 6 podiums. And we keep on saying who's going to take the fight to Palou. I mean, Kirkwood, Lundgaard, great on road courses, plenty of drivers great on ovals, but O'Ward is the most well-rounded currently, apart from, maybe Newgarden. But O'Ward found a new level of consistency and of execution that we've never really seen from our own McLaren this year. And I think that's what me and Archie have highlighted quite a lot. And look, there was a lot of bad luck from O'Ward. Portland having that mechanical issue and Nashville having that tyre failure really lost him 80, 90 points in those races, which was a huge disappointment. But nonetheless, I think it's been a superb year for O'Ward. And that step that we really needed to see him take had been promised year after year and good patches, but he's never done it across the course of the season. I feel like this year we finally have seen him execute across the course of the season. As we had said on the season review, this was a championship winning season in most cases. It's just Palou was so good, it's just made O'Ward look like he's had a bit of an average year.
I mean, this felt like the season, as we said, that O'Ward proved himself firmly as a future champion, which feels strange to say about a driver who's contended for titles in the past, but it just felt like a new kind of transformed, more measured and more reliable version of O'Ward, I thought. And without the misfortune of Portland and Nashville, he would have beaten Palou's 2024 title winning points tally pretty easily. And he actually matched Palou's 2 wins and 6 podiums from when he won his 3rd title last year. And in an ordinary year, we would probably be speaking about, or possibly be speaking about, the champion here. And it does just speak to that huge step forward from both the team and O'Ward. I think both of them were previously just a bit too streaky. I think in seasons gone by, as recently as last year, O'Ward had patches in the season where it all just seems to go awry. But this year, I feel like he cut out any of those errors, and those errant and scruffy weekends were much fewer and further between, and the poorer weekends were much less bad is probably the way that I put it. And he always spoke about, he maybe lost a yard in qualifying, but he gained a mile where it really mattered, I think, on race day. And we've seen phases of consistency from him in the past, but this year it was a whole season thing, which I think was a big step forward that he needed to make. Obviously 12 times in the top 10, 10 times in the top 5. Impressive stuff, and it was just unfortunate for him that Palou was in a different league. But O'Ward himself was kind of in a league of his own as well. Yeah,
I feel like it's been an incredible season, obviously, for Pato O'Ward. You mentioned him sort of in the past having had streaks of just being brilliant, and then there being sort of a streak of being not so brilliant. I feel this year has been sort of, it's just been it's been so consistent. He's been so consistent and brilliant pretty much every weekend. But there has been, instead of the streaks, there have been just unlike things we won't see from Palou, the just unrelentless nature of him, just the sort of, I don't know, the one result that will hurt him when he's against Palou, which is, I feel, it's so unlucky because, as we said, in most other seasons, this would be possibly a champion. So I think it's really difficult, but he's been so brilliant this year. I really can't wait to see if he can repeat it next year and, I don't know, challenge Palou even more.
Okay, I don't think we really have any debate about where Pato Ward is going for this one. I think it'll be above Christian Lundgaard. And I think whilst we're here, we might as well move Alex Palou to his deserving spot ahead of Pato Ward. I don't think there's any debate about that. We won't waste our time.
Is it possible to create a separate tier for Alex Palou?
I think that's probably the best idea.
I was going to say, I think he needs a tier of his own, or maybe about 4 or 5 tiers above anyone else, at least, to be honest. Just leave a few blank and then put Palou in.
Yeah, we'll leave the tier list up here anyway for the viewers to have a look at whilst we discuss Alex Palou. But we've said it almost every race this season. We've said it in our season reviews, so we won't go loads into Alex Palou season, because if you're an Alex Palou fan and want to hear more, you've got plenty of episodes to delve into it. But either way, 8 victories across the course of the season, including 13 podiums, 12 of them within the top 2 positions. He finished top 10 in 15 of 17 races, and one of those was obviously being crushed out in Detroit by David Malukas. It was about as good as of a year as you could possibly get. I mean, Palou was on another metric in qualifying, and oval pace. Every seemingly weakness, even small weakness he had, it felt like it had been rectified. There was no hole in Palou's strengths this year. There was nothing, pretty much nothing. I don't think you could actually critique him on across the course of the entire season. That is how good he was, and there's no flaws. And he's had championship winning seasons, which was dominant. 2023, we saw that as dominant. This was just incomparable. I mean, it was night and day to the rest of the field. It looked like he was. Well, he was in a different league to everybody else, but it looked like he was in a different car to everybody else for the way that he was performing. It was sensational when we were witnessing greatness across the course of the entirety of the year.
I mean, he was in a different league not only this season, but really in terms of anything we've really ever seen, and obviously particularly in the modern era. And yeah, it's only right, really, after the year that he had, that he's lifted himself into so many exclusive clubs. In terms of, I mean, he's one of only 6 drivers now to have 4 championships, one of only 4 to have won at least 3 in a row, and all of this. And as we keep banging on about, 6 years in IndyCar, that's all he's had in the series. 5 years with Ganassi. He's breaking records and becoming a legend in absolute record time, and it takes quite something special to turn a sport renowned for its unpredictability into something that becomes somewhat predictable. And the sort of inevitability that he has engineered is something so rare. It's something that's, I mean, it's nigh on unparalleled, really. And we've scarcely seen a driver team combination that's been so good, and I mean, continues to break new ground every season, no matter the new ground that they've broken previously, particularly, as you mentioned, Dan, 23 being that great season. And I mean, that's been dwarfed by the year that Palou's had in 25. I mean, he didn't quite get to the single season record of 10 wins, but even with 8 wins, only 3 individual drivers have ever achieved more in a single season. He was on the podium 13 times in 17 races, only outside the top 5 3 times, only twice outside the top 10. I mean, just remarkable. Like, it doesn't even feel right to say that short ovals or his outright pace were weaknesses. I think you've got to take that word with a pinch of salt. But looking at qualifying particularly, he never started worse than 9th. He was in the top 6 15 times, in the top 3 10 times. His 6 poles, that doubled his tally from his career to date, from 6 to 12. And yeah, to cap all of that off, he had his legacy-defining Indy 500 win as well. And yeah, just rather than bemoan the dominance, as some do. I think it's just been a year of great appreciation from the history that we're witnessing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about anyone else, but I'd go as far to say it's the greatest individual season by any driver I've seen, sort of in my lifetime anyway. Just the relentlessness and the way that he's made everyone else in a series that is comparatively, compared to other motorsports, fairly very even in its performance. He's just made them all look like they're just driving completely different cars. It's such an incredible season. It's really hard to put into words just how good. Just when you watch him perform the way he is, and just the way that he can cruise into a lead of 10, 20 seconds, just like he's not even trying to do so. It's just, I feel like in the past seasons, we've sort of seen him perform and get the results, but never have we seen it to this degree and the way that he's been so quick. Before, it's been sort of just consistently performing where others have sort of fallen off. This time it's just been complete and just utter domination, which I think we only can tip our hat and say, well done, Alex Palou.
So that's the tier list done. So for our Spotify listeners, for your benefit, I'll go over the order. So in A tier, it's Palou, O'Ward, Lundgaard, Kirkwood. In B tier, it's Dixon, Armstrong, Rosenqvist, Rasmussen, the VK, Malukas, and Sato. C tier is Power, Simpson, Newgarden, Herta, Ferrucci, Rossi, Daly, Eilert, Hunter Ray, and Foster. D tier is McLaughlin, Rahal, Siegel, Schwartzman, Castroneves, Ed Carpenter, Jack Harvey, and Rob. And F tier is Ericsson, Di Francesco, Abel, Larson, and Marco Andretti. And that is one of my favourite episodes of the year done, our driver review. Evan, thank you for joining us for the last 2 weeks. It's been great to have you on.
Thank you. It's been brilliant fun. Yeah.
Do we know what's on next week, Archie? I think we're now heading into proper off-seasoning now, aren't we?
TBC. I was going to say Dale Coyne Racing seats, but they're filling them quite early this year, so that's pretty nice to see.
Yeah, we are now properly in off-seasoning where we don't have a set plan each week. So stay tuned. We do have some fun ideas the off-season. We've got some nice games and stuff planned across the course of the off-season. So stay tuned. They will be really fun. And as always, we will strive to get an episode out weekly between now and St. Petersburg.
I will reveal the St. Pete counter. As we record, it is 156 days until first practice and also 33 weeks until Indy 500 practice commences. So there's that.
Apologies, this episode is a bit later this week. Hopefully, usual will be restored as of the next couple of weeks. Eagle-eyed viewers may notice I'm in a different setup, but I'm sort of not really. I'm currently building a simulator for the IndyCar game that we haven't spoken about yet, which we'll maybe speak about later on in our season. So that's definitely what I've put in the rigging for, just for that. So I'm preparing early. But anyway, that's why I'm currently in a seemingly different setup. But don't worry, things, they won't be back to normal, but this will be the new setup for any viewers wondering. Need to clarify the allegations before they come to me. But anyway, thanks very much for watching. Thanks very much for listening for the last 2 weeks. And we hope you've enjoyed this. As I said, one of our favourite episodes of the year. And let us know what your tier list is. Yours slightly different. Did we get anything right or did we get anything wrong? We appreciate the feedback as always. But for this week, thanks very much for watching. Thanks very much for listening. And we'll see you next time.